Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar session. Today we'll be speaking about the package Mais Habitação and also the NHR program. The Mais Habitação package has come into force last October, so today we'll be speaking about all those changes, and the NHR program due to the fall of the government and also the announcement that the NHR will be ending. We'll be speaking about that, discussing all its varieties and all its possibilities. With me, I have 4 special guests today. On my right side, Teresa, Schwalbach and Carla, Leandro from Sérvulo and Associates. And on my left side, I have João Cília, CEO from Porta, Christie, and Tomás Nogueira from Cronos Homes. Welcome everyone, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Firstly, we'll start with Teresa and Carla presentation, speaking about Mais Habitação package and the NHR. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session with also with the questions you already sent us. And if you need to ask some more questions, please write on the chat box on the YouTube, and we'll be more than happy to help you. I'll give now the stage to Teresa and Carla, please, when you're ready.
Okay, well, thank you all for assisting this webinar on Mais Habitação package. We thought it was a good idea to share with all the real estate investors all our thoughts about legal issues raised by the Mais Habitação package and also the NHR regime and these very recent changes that have brought a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion in the press and in all sort of investment markets. And we'll try to shed some light to you on the main changes and the impact that these changes will have in your investments, in your real estate investments in Portugal. I would emphasize as main measures with serious impact on the real estate market, these 6 measures that you can see on the screen. Basically, to summarize, we will have the new package entered into force in 7 of October of this year, and some of the measures that it presented with following: a limitation on the rents for new residential lease agreements subsequent to lease contracts entered into the last 5 years that are now limited to a 2% increase. Also, the establishment of forced leases for vacant houses that are aimed for residential purposes in order to make them enter the residential market if their owners do not voluntarily place them on the market. Also, the creation of the new tenant and landlord desk, which is aimed to create a more speedy and efficient judicial mechanism to basically speed up and enable quicker evictions and most efficient legal procedures for the termination of lease contracts that are not being fulfilled. Also, several new incentives to increase the residential market potential, basically bypassing them through local accommodation into the residential market. The establishment of a validity period of 5 years and some very specific conditions for approval of the renewal of existing local accommodation and more strict rules regarding the registration of local accommodations. And basically the suspension for a transitory period of time of new registrations of local accommodations, except in the interior areas where these local accommodations are able to keep on being registered in the same terms. So starting by the first measure, the limitations on rent, you will be able to see on this slide that we have placed here. It's just a brief summary of all the measures that have been approved, that the limitation of 2% only applies to new residential leases that follow the leases previously enforced in these houses for the last 5 years. And the law now limits the new contracts to an increase of rent of 2%. In any case, to provide an opening, and if these last contracts were not increased in their rents in the last 3 years, you are able to apply the last inflation ratios and also to add this to the 2% limit. Next slide, please.
Well, jumping in, I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said there are only 2 things certain in life, death and taxes. So inevitably, when you speak of properties and rentals, we have to speak about taxes. And quite uncommonly for tax lawyers, we do have some good news. The first of one is that there is a decrease on the tax rates applicable on rental income. So you can see on the slide that we're sharing the difference between the current rates and the new rates that will now be enforced for residential leases. This is, of course, the main difference, because then we have other potential significant reductions on the tax rates that may apply depending on the amount of the rent, in line with what Carla just explained, as well as with the date that the contracts are entered into. What I would note is that, of course, the application of these reduced rates for tax purposes may have to be balanced with the legal implications of having a longer rental agreement, which is something we can extend on during the Q&A. And also on a very other good news is the fact, and this will impact, of course, the alojamento local, so short-term rental, but those owners who have properties that were or are currently under the AL system and are transferred to permanent residential leases may benefit from a full tax exemption on the rental income if a few conditions are met. Namely, if by the end of 2022 they were dedicated to the to the AL system, and provided that they do register a permanent residential lease agreement with the tax authorities until the end of 2024. And that being so, during a few years, there may be a full exemption on the rental income, which is good news for those who may opt for this option.
Okay, as for local accommodation rules, basically you will have, there was a lot of fear of local accommodation developers that their licenses would be cancelled. But what the law specifically says is that now all the licenses which were perpetual are now subject to a 5-year limitation, and basically they are subject to renovation after a 5-year period in accordance to some specific requirements that have to be met by the developer and subject to the municipality. The municipality will be able to approve or deny the validity or the revalidation of the license in accordance not only to the meeting of criteria for such renovation, but also with in accordance to the urbanistic pressure that is applicable in that same municipality. Also, the main focus of the law was to limit at some point the constitution of local accommodation into horizontal property apartments in order to motivate the apartments in great pressure for need for residential necessities to enable them to be registered as new registration possibles. Okay, this has no impact for low density areas such as in the interior of Portugal, but also in main Algarve. There are still a few areas, and some areas in Alentejo, like Porta, which has a lot of touristic potential, and it's very searched for by investors, and that are still able to be registered as local accommodations as a whole.
And in connection specifically with the allogement local new rules, part of the tax treatment remains unchanged. However, we always like to draw the attention to the fact that having an AL license on a property may have a significant tax impact depending on the future goals that an owner may have for the property, namely the fact that if you decide to sell a property, and we can discuss that and we'll discuss that at a later stage, there may be a significant tax impact from the decision of selling a property having an AL activity open in the same. But today what we would most like to draw your attention is to the fact that there is a new tax. The law calls it an extraordinary tax, but unfortunately in Portugal, extraordinary things tend to last, so we may count on it for years to come. But there is a new extraordinary tax on properties arising from the AL activity, and it's going to prove a difficult calculation. We know it's going to be a 15% tax rate, but in line with what my colleague Carla just mentioned, it's hard to know how it's going to be calculated because you have to consider, as you may see on the slide that we're showing, the economical coefficient of the area, the urban pressure that is also applicable on the area where the property exists, and of course on the gross area that the property occupies. So the law is not clear at all, and there's a lot of indefinitions that do not allow us at this stage to say how this may or not be calculated. What we can let you know is that if we're speaking of owners who live in the property but also have the possibility to have an AL license and are developing the activity, they may be outside the scope of this new tax, provided that they do not lease the property under the AL for more than 120 days a year.
One of the main issues also that scared investors away was on the forced lease of vacant properties. But it's important for us to clarify exactly what is considered vacant in accordance to the Portuguese law. What the law says is these vacant properties have to be unused by the owners for more than 2 years and registered as being vacant because the utility supplier are forced to communicate to the municipality on a yearly basis that they have low consumptions or no consumptions or no utility contracts registered whatsoever. But the forced lease is not automatic. Basically, once this communication is made by these service providers that have to communicate with the municipalities the consumptions for each property, the municipalities are free to decide whether to notify the owners to use and provide use for that property, either by a lease contract or by another sort of use that is able in accordance to the law. And if the owner does not reply or refuses to provide for such lease, then the municipality is able to choose whether or not to lease the property. If not, it can communicate to the National Habitation Institute in RU that will also have the possibility of making a forced lease of these properties or not. So basically, it's not immediate. It requires a 2 years vacancy of the properties in order to make them eligible for this forced lease. And also the law establishes several types of exceptions regarding this vacancy. For instance, the properties that are not considered vacant are those that are intended for short rent or for vacational periods, like short periods on beaches, the countryside, spas and other vacation spots, or temporary rental or for personal use. Also, properties being refurbished during the period of refurbishment. Also, properties which have the construction completed for license for use less than 1 year ago, and also the acquired properties for resale during the period in which the resale is able to be done. So not all vacant properties are eligible for this forced lease, and even those that are, the eligibility is not immediate and has to meet some requirements. The information that we have collected is that most municipalities which are subject to this law do not intend to accomplish and to force the owners, because they think that there are other incentives that are possible and probably will go through those procedures instead of the forced leasing.
Quite opposite to forced leasing and vacant properties, we would like, in regards to the Mais Habitação, to leave one final note, because for the owners who live in a property which is also their permanent address, their tax address, the Mais Habitação brought a new condition for those who are thinking about selling and apply what we call the reinvestment regime. So the tax regime that allows you to have a full or partial tax exemption when you sell your permanent home and you intend to buy a new one. According to the Mais Habitação, you now have to have lived in that property for 24 months before you sell it, and there is no temporary or transitory rule. So this will apply to any sales that take place as of the moment the Mais Habitação came into force. And so it's an important notice to bear in mind when taking the decision to sell. But this being said, we would now very quickly like to address a topic which we know is on a lot of people's minds, which is a non-habitual residence regime and what's going to happen in the near future. On a very quick overview, the non-habitual residence regime, or NHR, is a personal income tax regime which allows individuals who come and live to Portugal and who have not lived here for the past 5 years to have tax exemptions or reductions during a 10-year period. In practical terms, this means that a lot of people who come to Portugal to benefit from this regime do not pay taxes at all in Portugal, even though they may pay it in their country of residence, of course. And we know that many people used to come to Portugal to benefit from this regime, but our government, who has now resigned, proposed to end this regime as of the 1st of January 2024. And all the information we have on this regime is changing as we speak. So what we know today is that in principle this regime will end by the last day of this year. Nonetheless, on one hand, the government is creating grandfathering provisions, so temporary rules that may allow people who come to Portugal until the end of 2024 to still benefit from the regime if they meet certain conditions, such as having already signed a lease agreement in Portugal, having signed a promissory agreement, having a residence visa, if not issued, at least required, because then it depends on the competent authorities. And on the other hand, the government is also proposing to create a different beneficial regime, a sort of an NHR2, but completely different, focused on people who come to Portugal to work on research and development. The conditions will be very strict, and we will be happy during the Q&A to extend on it, but now I would pass on to Anna to continue our conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Teresa and Carla. We now will open our Q&A session. We are already receiving some questions via YouTube. We are seeing them, we're going to answer them. Now I'm going to start with João, a little more generic question. Do you believe that these measures from Mais Habitação package will affect the prices both in terms of lease and rental purchases?
Okay.
What is your insight?
Thank you. Well, dividing both of the topics we've discussed here today, one is Mais Habitação, the other one is the end of the RHN regime. So, regarding the Mais Habitação, I believe that all the uncertainty that we have on the last few months had some impact, but probably the impact was on the reverse of what was expected. Mm-hmm. So we had a lot of property owners that didn't put the houses on the market for rental because they wanted to know best what was going to be the final legislation, and we see the prices this year rising in terms of the rentals. So we see a huge price increase. We don't expect the prices to go down. at least in the short medium term, because the restrictions and the offer, so the supply of houses in the rental, we don't expect big changes in the near future. Regarding the residentes não habituais,
NHR, it's easier.
NHR is easier. So regarding that, we don't believe there will be an impact overall in the market. We need to see one thing is we need to distinguish what the market is between like the normal market that impacts the majority of Portuguese people. And if you look into the number of people that applied to the regime, and the number of them who bought a house in Portugal or who bought an apartment in Portugal, it's very small compared to the number of transactions we had. So it's a very, very small percentage. So it won't impact the market overall in terms of price. If we look into the high end of the market, so if you talk about houses above 3 million euros, which are very small number of transactions per year in Portugal, it may impact a little bit. I don't expect a huge impact also, but it may impact a little bit, not the prices, but the number of transactions first. And the question there is, the supply of this type of houses, it's very small in Portugal. So it's very hard to have a direct impact that is significant. It can be the fact that people will have a little bit time selling the properties if you're a seller. So it may take a little bit more time. It may take that you negotiate a little bit further, but I don't expect a significant change in the near term or even in the medium term.
Thank you. And Tomás, do you think that these new measures and this back and forth all year, does it create instability amongst investors?
First, it's good to separate between a private investor and an institutional investor. I think that João is way more able to speak about the private investor than I am, because they deal with them on a daily basis. When it comes to the institutional investor, in speaking on what we know about the operations, mainly because we're on the Portuguese market and we're more focused between Lisbon and the Algarve, while in Lisbon we're focused on first home residences, very driven to Portuguese buyers. Probably in the Algarve we're more driven into second home, touristic residences, in which the buyer has a different mix between different countries and foreigners, and also between different motivation to buy. Having said this, obviously focusing probably a little bit more on the Portuguese market, what we see on the Lisbon market, what we see is that the buyer is, at least in our operations, and we have a big volume, is more than 25% bought from Portuguese people. And when you say from Portuguese people, families essentially, because that's what we've been seeing in the market, that the current problem we have with the residential stock is more driven for the families. Obviously, when it comes to speak about how the investors see this, they don't necessarily see the direct impact, as João was also saying, because there's not a reduction on the number of transactions on real estate, residential real estate. There is not a price reduction on the residential real estate, but there is a big uncertainty. And when it comes to speak about institutional investors, certainty or the inexistence of certainty, it's one of the biggest risks that we need to measure. And I think we don't see an immediate impact. We see doubts, and we see that probably if we could, I usually say that worse than having bad is not having. Yes. I don't know if this in English sounds good.
It's the uncertainty.
It's uncertainty. So in the end of the day, what we really need to focus, and I believe that's one of the key goals for us to be here today, is to try to clarify to the people what's going to be the impacts first on the tax schemes that we're analyzing, and second, giving a further analysis on what's the market and what's the actual living stock that we have on the resi or on other sides of the real estate industry that might be in impact or not. But when it comes to finalize my answer, when it comes to real estate investors, biggest risk is no doubtfully uncertainty. If we have certainty, even though if it's on a worst scheme, it gets easier than not having certainty. Sure.
Yes, for sure. And taking on that answer, with the possible end of the NHR program, international investors will easily look to our neighbors, Spain, Italy, and so on, which will maintain their programs with happy. Do you think this will impact directly your development sector?
I see the NHR more as a macroeconomic issue rather than a specific from the real estate sector. I think Portugal, it's a country where we have a very low level of savings. It's a country where we're essentially focused on the services segment, and we don't export that much as we should. And obviously the real estate, it's within this part, but I think that being this a macroeconomic subject, it's gonna be impacted by, I'm gonna repeat again, the certainty,
Yes.
of course, but in the end it's gonna be just it's gonna be the result of the policies that we end up by deciding.
Yeah.
What I want to say is that this question is entirely related to the first that you said, which is for a country to grow, one of the key KPIs, it's a foreign investment.
Yes.
And what the question might be related to: will foreign investors look to other countries now that they don't know what's going to happen in Portugal, or they don't know what's the future, what the future awaits for us? That might be the case, but that won't be impacting necessarily the real estate markets. That will be impacted the economy as a whole. And I think the discussion is way more wider than just the real estate sector, and it probably has more impacts on other sectors rather than the real estate, because as João mentioned already, and I kind of agree with him, everyone agrees that we have a clear problem of supply. And while the market is so unbalanced, I think that for the medium term, we won't be feeling that impact. But for sure, on a macroeconomic perspective, that might impact. But I'm not an economist, so.
This one is for Teresa and Carla. Does the local accommodation regime end from now on? Anyone who already has a license signed is left without it?
No, the answer is no, unless there is a period of validation, a revalidation of the existing license, which ends, by the way, on the 6th of December. So anyone that needs to confirm the activity further and to update their licenses, please go to the electronic desk, Balcão Único Eletrónico, to renovate and to confirm your activity as a local accommodation developer. Otherwise, it will be cancelled. But in any other circumstance, what the law says is that the presently registered local accommodation apartments will still be valid, and will only be subject to cancellation in cases of condominium decisions with an approval of 2/3 of the building's capital that decide to oppose to the functioning of a local accommodation that has a description in the horizontal property title as being aimed at residential purposes. If the property is already meant for a local accommodation, it will not be subject to cancellation from the condominium. This is very important for developers to know, and it's relevant that you know that if you revalidate your license until the 6th of December, there will be no consequences for you for your local accommodation registry, and you will be able to operate. Don't forget that in 5-year terms, you will need to revalidate it with the municipality. But for now, the existing registries will not be affected.
Okay. This one, I believe it's a tricky one, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What are the exceptions to increasing income by 2%? Is there any option that is more advantageous? What can owners do if they want to enter into new contracts with more than 2% increase?
Well, the 2% is also cumulative with the inflation annual renovation, which for this year is 7%. And as I explained earlier in the presentation, you are able to apply for earlier revisions if you haven't done it in the previous contract. This limitation only occurs to already priorly leased apartments for the last 5 years. If you are entering the market now, there are no limitations to the rent that you can apply, and the idea and the proposed change in the law is to incentivize the placement of properties in the market. So, for example, if you are changing from local accommodation to the lease market, there are no limitations to the rent if the lease agreement hasn't been entered to in the last 5 years. Okay.
Okay, just one more about that we just received live. If both parties to a long term wish to agree a rent higher than the previous rent plus 2% and higher than the table one, the new law is stopping them, would be stopping that increase?
Yes, in theory,
if
yes.
both parties agree to increase more than that?
That's true, because it's an imperative limitation.
Okay.
And basically you couldn't go around it, not in a very clear way. But if you ask me, if both parties agree and the tax authorities will not, as I suspect, monitor this, then I don't see what the consequences may be with regards to this new update in the rent. I really can't see the tax authorities enforcing an agreement that actually brings more money to the public states as a higher tax withdrawal will apply for this specific contract. But this is something that we will have to see with the enforcement of the law, and it's not possible to anticipate now what's going to happen.
As agents, just to complement a little bit on that, as agents, we've been seeing in those occasions where both parties are on agreement, some costs are included in the contract in order to increase above the 2%. So, for example, costs of directly related to the apartment can be added up to the contract, and in that case, the property owner is able to increase more than 2%.
Yes,
and this is a way to
João, you're absolutely right, because it's not the law does not forbid that you charge a rent for the loaning of furniture or for condominium expenses, and it's possible to charge any extra amounts for other expenses that are not specifically included in the rent. So this is not limited in any manner, and it's obviously possible.
Just one more for you. What benefits do I have if I want to move from local to renting?
Well, if you want, I can take that on, because
You
there are
take it. It's tax.
quite a
It's
different
tax advantages. So I leave you to it.
Well, actually, I would start by making a preliminary remark, which I think it's important for people to be aware of, which is the fact that local lodging already have more severe tax consequences before Mais Habitação, when compared to residential leases or other options. I think what happened now is that it became a bit more visible, not only because we're creating more taxes on local lodging, as we are also at the same time creating benefits for those who transition to residential leases. And as I had the opportunity to mention earlier, for those who, and I can try to back out here on our slides, just so you have this information. Oh, here it is. So, sorry, just a bit more behind. So basically the advantages will be on one hand, if you see on the right side of the slide, those who transition from local lodging to rental agreements may actually have tax-free, and I know this sounds weird in Portugal, but then it's limited in time, so no harm done. But you can actually have tax-free rental income if you transition from local lodging to residential lease and you meet the conditions which we mentioned in our slides. And together with that, if there is rental income which is taxable, you may still have lower rates than what we used to have a few months ago, which in this case, and I always make a point in saying this, to have the tax benefits, it implies you have a longer lease agreement. For instance, if you're talking about 20 years of a residential lease, you can have a 5% tax rate, which is quite amazing, but then it may carry different legal consequences which have to be carefully analyzed.
Longer contracts are more difficult to handle, and longer relationships with the tenants are usually more conflictuous.
Now I'd like to focus a bit more on the NHR regime, if it's okay for you. Okay. João, with the resignment of our Prime Minister in the past weeks, this decision to the NHR regime is still open. And the discussion is still on the table. Does Porta Frente have many customers using this regime?
Well, one point is important is we don't see still any change in the market dynamics. As I told you, and I think this is really relevant to say, this is still a market that is really constrained by supply. So we don't see, as far as we go, any changes in either prices or transactions. So we continue to experience a growth in transactions, and we continue to see whenever we launch a new development that has a price that is acceptable, obviously, we see a lot of success in the launches of this new development. So, and even in the sale of singular houses or apartments. Regarding if we have a lot of people using NHR, like I said before, I think this is a question about, we do have some people using NHR for very high price houses, so for high value houses. We're talking about above, I normally use the point of 3 million as a cutoff point. In which the number of foreigners increases substantially in the total transactions we do. In that sense and in that point, there are a few. The question there also is, would that people continue to buy properties in Portugal also, and for how long? And that's probably the key question. What we see is we continue to have new foreigners coming to Portugal, buying apartments. We also have a few examples of people that say, well, I don't know if I'm staying in Portugal or not. They put that in question, or we see some clients asking that. But like Tomás said, even for property owners that are not investors or are single investors, uncertainty also hits more than the fact that the end of the NHR. So what people see is, if I buy a property now, will the market go down and then I won't be able to sell it? Will I lose a lot of money because of that? And it's always about questions, much more questions relating the market and how the market will evolve than the actual regulation by itself. So the key point there is people are asking, what impact will the regulation have on the market? And I'm worried not about the regulation, but the impact it has on the market. It's not that I'm going away because of the end of NHR. I'm still figuring out if it's the good time to buy a property right now. And that's the big point, not so much the direct impact of NHR.
Yeah. You were
Which, just one quick point, which I believe that it's transitory. After people see the end of the regime, they gain a little bit more confidence and the market reestablished. But still, even with that, we cannot, we're not worried, and our sales and transactions do not have been hit by that.
Yeah. João was making an important point, which is about supply. And this one is for you, Tomás. This new Mais Habitação package aim to solve or help our challenges in real estate in Portugal. Are there any measures to encourage new construction in Portugal? It is difficult to build new buildings in Portugal.
I think that the segment of developing homes, it's impacted by different key players. Being those different key players, the developers, the construction industry as a whole, the investors who work closely with investors, and in the end, and very important, the buyers. Speaking on the developer, which is where I'm more able to speak about, there's key bits that we've been discussing and that's being on the table of discussions for a long time, which could allow and could help for the new construction to grow. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the tax issues and on the tax inefficiencies that we have compared to other countries such as Spain, which is right by our side, but more, but being as also a very important key bit for projecting new construction in the future, but also the allotments revision, which could be a very, very important item for allow to new construction. And also, and very important that we're not discussing today, unfortunately, because we don't have any further news on that, the simplification on licensing. These are three key bits that for a developer would help to boost and to give further confidence on the market to develop new construction. Taxes, simplification of licensing, and the revision of the allotments. Just a brief overview why I'm saying revision of the allotments, because the allotments that we have specifically in the city centers are very dated, and this means that they're not driven, or they're not very adapted to the current needs of the population. Whilst in the 90s we would like to have big houses with big living rooms and with big terraces and with big bedrooms. Today the mindset is changing. People live in smaller houses. I'm not saying that we're going to live on a 2-bedroom with 60 square meters. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the current allotments, as an average number, they probably have between 130 to 150 square meters per unit when it comes to multifamily allotments. And this makes the efficiency of the development very low for a developer from one side, and from the investor on the other side, and on the last but not least, for the buyer, because the buyer buys square meters but also buys bedrooms and living rooms. And sometimes a buyer would be more keen to buy, let's call it a 100 square meter T2, because it has 2 bedrooms, instead of buying the same T2 with 115 square meters. Maybe he will not use them, and maybe the developer could use those 15 square meters to make an additional unit. And this is what's one of the key bits that could drive the market. Another key bit, it's obviously the construction segment. The construction segment in the industry itself has suffered a lot since the last crisis, because in the early 2000s, 2007, 2008 crisis, there were a lot of construction companies who suffered a lot and disappeared from the market. So today we have few companies that are able to develop big projects and to build in a way that a developer and an investor can believe that they will be able to finish the works in time and in price. And they've been struggling a lot, not just because there are few companies today, but because market-wise and macro macro things that happen, such as the supply chain disruptions that happened due to COVID, alongside with inflation, made that the construction companies suffer today to have more materials in time and in price. So it's harder for them to also close fixed price contracts and delay on deliveries. Also, and it's probably one of the problems that we will have in the future, and we're already seeing as of we speak on the labor constraint for the construction companies. Today it's very, very hard to keep up with the necessary resources to build. Having this said, what I mean is that besides all the material impact and all the material constraints that we have today, all the construction companies also struggle to find workforce for the works. And obviously all the growing needs of ESG and regulation that we're finding are very important. From the investor side, very important. We've already told certainty and being in a place where they can. I don't like to say that the investor only looks at an Excel, because it's not true. But they look to an Excel. They make their financial models. They see what's going to be the profitability of their investment, and we need to be competitive on that side. And this is a mix of all of these factors that I've tried to explain that could help an investor feel more comfortable and more confident that the way that he's putting his investment on a spreadsheet will work on the tangible side. And this is very important. And on the buyer side, it's key to have all these mixed ingredients so that then the buyer has a product that he likes, from a design point of view, but also very important from also a price point of view, which is very important. In Portugal, unfortunately, the average income is very low, and we have to focus both on foreigners who have the capability to buy a differentiated product with a higher price, but also on the Portuguese families, which might not have the same income, so that they can have a good place to live in the future. Yeah.
Thank you. We have two questions very similar from two different people. I'd like to ask to Carla and Teresa. They have signed the promissory agreement on a development, and they have cedência contratual.
Transfer contractual.
Okay, that's the right term. And they want to know if the new package, Mais Habitação, will affect those contracts.
No, not at all. No. Not at all. It has no impact on the present transactions, so it's pretty straightforward. The transfer is for acquisition, so it's okay. From the acquisition point of view, there are no changes, no legal impact in the transactions that are current for the acquisition or sale of properties. On the contrary, the idea is to incentive residential markets. So any property that you want to buy and sell, I'm sure the market welcomes it very well.
Okay, that's a good news.
Yes,
there are good news,
but there are good news actually.
I have another one. For Golden Visa clients wanting NHR who are still waiting for their resident card, do they need to apply for NHR before the end of this year or not?
Well, that's the €1 million question. In terms of context, I would just like to add that we are speaking in probably the most complicated moment in time, because on November 29th, the final version of the law will be approved in Parliament, and then we will know for sure what it's true, what it's not, and we will be working towards the stability that investors and
we'll reunite again.
Want. Our advice as lawyers is always to apply before the last day of the year, but people who have applied for the Golden Visa and are waiting for our authorities to work may actually fall within one of the temporary rules that are going to be created, because of course the government was sensitive to the fact that people cannot be harmed by something that is not in their hands to control, basically, which is the timings under which they can get their Golden Visa approved or other types of residence permits.
Okay. I have another one for you. will mandatory leasing become a universal rule for vacant homes?
Well,
It's a difficult one also.
no, mandatory leasing is an universal rule in several other countries. I've looked up and investigated a bit, and I think it's Amsterdam that only leaves houses to be empty for 2 months and then forces a lease. So we are not there yet, and I don't think we will be. I think that the conditions are so strict, and the municipalities are very sensitive to the fact that they wish people to be free to decide whether they want to lease their houses or not. The solution for this problem, and I think the city halls are sensitive to that, is a public solution. It passes through the construction of more municipal and affordable residences for people that need residence, students and families with low incomes actually need solutions that has to be the state to provide. I don't believe, honestly, that neither the municipalities, namely the municipality of Lisbon, that has clearly said that it would not do it, and the National Residential Institute in RU has either the will or the capacity to invade people's privacy and force leases in this situation. The forced lease was created for another specific situation, which was when houses were not being maintained and not properly refurbished. And that made sense because the forced lease was created for the municipality to justify that it would have to compensate itself for the refurbishment that it had to do instead and in replacement of the owners of the property, which refused or were unable to do that refurbishment. But this is something else. This is invasion of privacy, and I believe that this law will never apply in these cases because for these municipalities with high pressure on residential needs, the municipalities have clearly said that they would not choose to do this, and I don't think the state has the structure and the capability of ensuring this direct lease to cope with this situation, quite frankly.
Okay. Thank you. We are coming to an end. We'll have 10 more minutes. We are speaking for almost an hour. This one, I believe it's for you, Teresa. Are there any specific professions will remain outside the NHR regime? Is there any alternative to a more attractive tax regime, considering the end of the NHR as we know it?
Well, always assuming that the NHR will come to an end.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier very briefly, the government is considering creating 2 alternatives. One of them that we already know, which is the return program, so thought up for people who used to live in Portugal, immigrated, and may now come back. There has been a bit of controversy in the legal sector as to who can be eligible for this regime, because the first version that went into Parliament, there you go, said that basically anyone who has never lived in Portugal but came to live in Portugal and worked, either because they have an employment contract or they're freelancers, could be eligible for the regime. This now seems that, there you go, I'm a tax lawyer, so I have to give bad news, may not be as favorable, because there you go. The party of the government has now proposed an amendment to this specific regime, saying that it will only apply to people who lived in Portugal, immigrated, and will return. So we'll need to wait for 29th of November to know exactly who can apply for this regime, but we will have, I'm calling it an NHR2 because the basis of the regime is mostly the same. It will last for 10 years. People can never have lived in Portugal. They will have tax exemptions or reductions on all types of income that they may receive, dividends, employment income, interest, pensions. But there you go, there are significant restrictions as to who can be eligible. And we're mostly liking, here what the government seems to be thinking is to incentivize the R&D sector, the technology sector, so we have to be looking at people with a high degree of education, such as having a PhD, or working in the research and development system. On a very small criticism, but also an alert to the market, what we see here again was that there was a certain need of the government to wish to control from a bureaucratic perspective the regime. So people may have to work for companies that are registered, for instance, as startups within our legal system, or their jobs have to have been registered with certain public entities to be able to benefit from the regime. So we are anticipating a bit of a bureaucracy that if this new system comes into play, not only it will be very hard to have people who will be eligible to apply, but we'll also have a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare to walk towards getting people the benefits as well. But let's wait until the final message is let's wait for November 29th.
We promise we'll reunite in
Afterwards
2024 to discuss this. Yeah. I'd like to end with João and Tomás. João, regarding the premium segment, which is where Porta Frente Christie operates, can you balance us 2023? How was this year? What do we expect to 24?
This year was very good for the sector. So in terms of the market, so we've been into a positive dynamics from the last years. 2022 was a great year for the sector. 2023, in this specific segment, so we're talking about the premium market, was also very, very positive. So we're experiencing growth versus last year. This growth mainly due to two things: an increase in price, but a smaller increase than we had last year, and an increase in transactions, so a continuous increase in transactions. Regarding next year, I believe that the fundamentals of the market are not changing, and the fundamentals, we've talked about it today. The lack of supply, which will keep the price, at least keep the price at the same levels, if not increasing a little bit. Also, the dynamics of inflation, etc., so which is already normalizing. So what we expect is to continue with a small price increase, not as much as in the last few years, but still a small price increase. We also don't see, even in the second semester, any slowdown in the growth of transactions. So we continue to see that not only for Portuguese and what I call the affluent side of the market. So we're talking about new developments in Lisbon and the Lisbon area, targeted for middle-high class or high class of Portuguese people. We continue to see a very liquid market, a lot of transactions, a lot of success in new launches, and we expect that to continue to 2024. If we would talk about 1 year ago, we would expect with the increase in the interest rates and the higher interest rates, this market will be hindered, but it wasn't. So people continue to search for this type of products, and we don't see any big and significant change for the next year. Regarding the high end, once again, the high end of the market, if there's more offer in the market grows. If there's less supply in the market grows less or doesn't grow. It's a market that is very driven by the supply and the amount of supply that we have, because this market is so small that the new development in a very high end changes the dynamics of supply and demand, and then brings new supply, and then transactions grow because the demand is latent and it's here. So.
And on a hand note, Tomás, do you anticipate an increase on the supply for the coming years.
Yeah. First, just a small correction and a compliment to Porta de Frente. I think you work really well the premium segment, but I also think you work really well other segments, because at Kronos we work a lot with you guys.
Yes.
And we have medium high segment, which I think you work really well as well, and that's where we've been focused as well. In Lisbon we have different types of products on the high segment, but also different with not that high price, and I think you've been doing also great work on those projects. Whilst in the Algarve we have very high-end products as well, such as Valdololo and Palmares Resort, I think so. But going back to your question, I think that no doubtfully the production will increase, not necessarily on a year-over-year basis, because it's hard again to increase stock if all the other measures are not fulfilled, such as those that I've spoke about, being the key ones: the simplification of licensing, the revision of the allotments, and in the end, again, having certainty. I think there's a big appetite for the Portuguese market when it comes to the investors, for the institutional investors. I think that all us as the developers struggle a bit to be able to pass a clear and concise message when it comes to timings and future prospects in terms of profitability, which is important. And I think that if these questions are solved, there will be an increase on the production. Obviously, I repeat, I think there will be an increase on the production. If it will be enough to fulfill the demand that we have today in the market, I don't see in the next few years that would happen. Also, and very important, it's a message that it's also important to pass, which is the developers and the investors, they don't necessarily need higher prices on the market. They don't necessarily need to sell more expensive houses to have more margin on their developments. No, they need a good pace on their investments, because they usually look into what's their profitability on time, and they need in the end to have a clear vision of the future business plan on the micro level, and the clear vision on the economy and the policies on macro level.
Thank you, Tomás. I don't know if you want to add something else. We are closing in.
Just a big thank you for this webinar and for everyone's
everyone
time, and for those who are watching us from home. And
Yes.
well, we are here if you need us.
Thank you for bearing with us for 1 hour. And, thanks a lot.
We received a lot of questions. We couldn't answer them all, but we are going to leave our contacts, both Sérvulo, Porta de Christie, and the Kronos Homes, and you can contact them directly, and we'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you to our guests, and see you soon.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thank you.